They called him the most despicable person in sports, a ball hog, a choker, a guaranteed loser. But what if everything you thought you knew about Elvin Hayes was wrong? This is the story of how one of basketball's greatest players became its most misunderstood villain, and how a single act of loyalty would change everything. Elvin Ernest Hayes entered the NBA as basketball royalty. The #1 overall pick in 1968, Hayes came from the University of Houston as a three-time All-American and the man who ended UCLA's 47-game winning streak in the game of the century. Over 50,000 fans watched him outduel Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on national television. He was supposed to be the next big thing. Instead, he became basketball's most polarizing figure. By the time Hayes retired in 1984, the numbers told an incredible story. Second all-time in scoring with 27,313 points. Third all-time in rebounds with 16 out 279. He played in 303 games, missing only 9 contests in 16 seasons. He was a 12-time All-Star, made 3 All-NBA first teams, and won an NBA championship in 1978. His 50,000 minutes played was first all-time when he retired. The Hall of Fame inducted him in 1990, and he made both the NBA's 50th and 75th anniversary teams. These aren't just good numbers. These are legendary numbers that put him among the greatest players ever. But statistics don't tell the whole story. From his very first season, Hayes was labeled as trouble. The Houston Rockets were an expansion team with a terrible 15-67 record. Hayes was expected to carry the franchise, but his individual brilliance came with intense conflicts. Writers observed that his first 2 years were defined by individual greatness mixed with controversy and arguments with teammates and opponents. The problem started immediately with his first coach, Jack McMahon. McMahon blamed Hayes for costing him his job. During a playoff game, McMahon said Hayes kept criticizing his teammates and yelled at Don Kojis for his defensive performance. Hayes demanded a trade and berated his teammates after losses. McMahon felt Hayes had an identity problem and mistook himself for the coach. Things got worse under Alex Hannum, a respected Hall of Fame coach who had successfully managed difficult personalities like Wilt Chamberlain and Rick Barry. But Hannum couldn't handle Hayes. Years later, Hannum made a comment that haunted Hayes forever. He called him the most despicable person he had ever met in sports. This wasn't said in the heat of the moment, but years after their time together. Hannum labeled Hayes as spoiled and a frontrunner who didn't face tension with courage. He believed the Bullets later won their championship despite Hayes, not because of him. The final straw in Houston came with coach Tex Winter. Winter tried to turn Hayes into a passing center, changing his isolation-heavy style of play. Hayes resisted because he thought it would hurt his offensive statistics. Winter publicly stated that Hayes had the worst fundamentals of any player he had ever coached. This philosophical battle resulted in Hayes being traded away from the city where he was a collegiate legend. Hayes didn't just clash with coaches. His relationships with teammates were equally strained. His rivalry with forward Don Kojis became legendary for all the wrong reasons. Kojis reportedly kept a diary with Hayes as the chief character, documenting all his negative behavior. Kojis was jealous of Hayes' salary and felt he deserved more money. Eventually, Kojis asked for a trade because he couldn't stand playing with Hayes anymore. Teammate Toby Kimball fed the growing narrative, calling Hayes too intent on being a one-man show and a rotten apple. These internal issues weren't kept private. Reporters heard about Hayes' behavior and shared it with the public, making his negative image even worse. In 1974, Sports Illustrated piece perfectly captured his reputation, calling him a ball hog, a rotten apple, a dumbbell, and a guaranteed loser. The media painted him as a sullen, self-serving prima donna who demanded to be traded at just 22 years old. But there was more to Hayes' early struggles than just a bad attitude. His original contract with the Rockets was deemed highly inequitable by his attorney. The deal was based on verbal promises from team ownership that the franchise wouldn't move from San Diego and that Hayes wouldn't be traded. Believing these promises, Hayes invested in a house and restaurant in San Diego. When these promises were broken, he had legitimate reasons to be unhappy. This wasn't just a spoiled player throwing tantrums. This was someone who had been misled and felt betrayed. The combination of Hayes' immaturity, the pressure of carrying a losing franchise, and a fundamentally flawed contract created the perfect storm. His public displays of frustration may have been reactions to these circumstances rather than character flaws, but the damage was done. His reputation was set in stone. Everything changed when Hayes was traded to the Baltimore Bullets. He was paired with fellow Hall of Famer Wes Unseld, forming one of the most dominant front courts of the era. Their styles were perfectly matched. Hayes was the dominant scorer and rebounder with his signature turnaround jumper. Unseld was the selfless, bruising anchor and elite rebounder. Together, they led the Bullets to 3 NBA Finals appearances and a championship in 1978. But even winning a championship couldn't escape Hayes from his reputation. The 1978 NBA Finals against the Seattle Supersonics became the defining moment of his choker narrative. He was already known as the Silent E, a nickname given by Peter Vesey to describe his struggles in critical fourth-quarter moments. A Sports Illustrated feature even questioned whether he could justify his status by not dissolving at the end of Game 7. The dramatic events of Game 7 seemed to confirm every negative belief about Hayes. He had been the Bullets' best player for most of the series, but he fouled out in the fourth quarter while his team was holding a lead. The incident was controversial. Commentator Rick Barry claimed that a vindictive referee was making hasty foul calls against Hayes because he disliked his complaining. Replays reportedly showed that some of the fouls weren't actually committed, but it was too late. In a shocking twist, the Bullets won the championship without Hayes on the floor. This immediately fueled the narrative that the team was better off without him in clutch moments. The perception of him as someone who disappeared in moments of crisis was so strong that it overshadowed his overall performance statistics. The Finals MVP debate perfectly showed how complex Hayes' reputation was. The award went to Wes Unseld, but many people disagreed with this decision. While Unseld was the emotional leader and glue of the team, his offensive numbers in the series were modest. He was even outplayed by his Seattle opponent in the final game. Hayes was the statistical leader, and a strong argument could be made that he was the best two-way player throughout the series. The Bullets' Bob Dandridge, a consistently clutch performer, was reportedly announced as the winner before the decision was changed. Unseld ultimately won the award not for his numbers, but for his leadership, team-first attitude, and as a career achievement award. This perfectly represents Hayes' entire career. His on-court excellence was always judged through the lens of his reputation, which valued team chemistry and clutch performance over raw statistical output. For years, this seemed like the end of Hayes' story. A statistical marvel whose greatness was always debated because of his perceived attitude problems. His early career conflicts were seen as proof of his difficult personality. His resistance to coaching changes was viewed as selfishness. His reputation consistently placed him lower on all-time lists than his incredible statistics suggested. But in 1990, something happened that changed everything. When Hayes was selected for induction into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame, he did something nobody expected. He boycotted the ceremony and refused to attend until his college coach, Guy V. Lewis, was also admitted. This act of profound loyalty stood in direct contradiction to every selfish ball hog and rotten apple label that had defined his professional career. Hayes refused to accept the highest honor in his sport until the man who gave him his start was also recognized. This wasn't a quick decision or a publicity stunt. This was a deeply held commitment to someone who had been loyal to him. Guy V. Lewis wasn't just any coach. He was a pioneer who helped integrate basketball in the South. He was one of the first coaches to recruit African-American players to the University of Houston. Hayes and Don Chaney were his first two black recruits. Lewis took a risk on Hayes when others might not have, and Hayes never forgot that loyalty. This public stand for his mentor completely reframed Hayes' perceived arrogance. It showed a man with deep values and unwavering loyalty to those who supported him. It suggested that his earlier conflicts might have been products of immaturity in difficult circumstances, not reflections of his true character. After his playing career ended, Hayes took significant steps to grow as a person. He returned to the University of Houston to finish his undergraduate degree, calling it the hardest thing he had ever done. He pursued a childhood dream of becoming a sheriff's deputy in Liberty County, Texas. He also served as a radio analyst for his alma mater. These actions showed personal growth and a commitment to education and service. The legacy of Elvin Hayes teaches us that athletic greatness and public perception don't always match. His career achievements place him among the elite players of his generation and all time. He had a devastating turnaround jumper and was an elite two-way force. Yet a powerful counter-narrative shaped by personality conflicts, coaching clashes, and a reputation for struggling in clutch moments consistently placed him lower on all-time lists than his statistics deserved. Hayes' story proves that on-court greatness and positive public image aren't always connected. His early career conflicts were made worse by a toxic team environment, an unfair contract, and immense pressure on a young star. While his resistance to coaching changes was a source of legitimate friction, his later act of loyalty to his college coach provides important context that complicates the established narrative. Hayes' legacy is ultimately a mix of profound contradictions. He was a statistical marvel whose greatness was always debated because of the reputation that followed him everywhere. His story reminds us that people are complex, and that single acts of character can reshape how we understand someone's entire life. The man once called the most despicable person in sports showed that loyalty, growth, and redemption are always possible.